The 110 gang has been terrorizing the southwest side of Syracuse for what police believe has been more than 20 years.
Developing story tonight, a 6-year-old boy with critical injuries is under the close watch of doctors at Upstate University Hospital after being shot last night by his uncle.
Devastation, pain, and destruction that is almost incomprehensible. That two people could do so much damage to so many other people in so many ways.
Over the past 2 decades, Syracuse, New York, has been at the center of a growing crisis fueled by organized street gangs that have waged turf wars, flooded communities with narcotics, and inflicted violence on neighborhoods already struggling with poverty and disinvestment. Among the most notorious of these criminal groups are the 110 Gang, the Bricktown Gang, and the V-Not Gang. Each has left a trail of destruction and trauma across the city's south and southwest sides, where rivalries often escalated into shootings, murders, and complex drug trafficking networks. In response, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies launched a series of sweeping investigations and indictments charging dozens of members under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act and other serious criminal statutes. These coordinated takedowns not only disrupted violent operations, but also brought long overdue justice to victims and relief to neighborhoods living under siege. What follows is a detailed look at the indictments and criminal prosecutions that reshaped Syracuse's gang landscape.
The 110 gang has been terrorizing the southwest side of Syracuse for what police believe has been more than 20 years.
Gangs poison our communities with drugs and violence, taking lives, destroying families, and recruiting young people to perpetuate this tragedy.
But with this indictment unsealed, these 14 men face charges of conspiracy to violate the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a gang believed to use violence to protect its territory, and blamed for 37 acts allegedly committed in Syracuse since 2012, including 2 murders, 6 shootings, 2 stabbings, and substantial drug dealing.
So on October 14th of 2015, we had a homicide at 148 Hope Avenue, and then shortly thereafter, in November the 10th of 2015, we had a homicide on 550 South Clinton Street. Both of these homicides we discovered was in connection with the 110 gang members. Each of the suspects were identified as a member of the 110 gang. So we called a truce trigger in connection.
The 110 Gang, also known by the nickname Face Mob, in honor of slain member Daron Face Scott, has long operated as one of the most violent and entrenched street gangs on the southwest side of Syracuse, New York. The gang maintains strong control over a defined area stretching from Tallman Street to Onondaga Avenue and from Centennial Drive to Lincoln Avenue. Since the early 2000s, the 110 Gang evolved from a drug distribution ring into a broader criminal enterprise involved in drug trafficking, credit card fraud, robbery, and violent enforcement tactics. According to a 2010 Department of Justice press release, the gang routinely guarded that territory and resorted to acts of violence to ensure that no rival gang members encroached upon their territory. That pattern of violence and intimidation became the hallmark of the gang's operations. On October 29, 2018, federal prosecutors announced a major RICO indictment against 14 alleged members of the 110 Gang. Each was charged with conspiracy, which is designed to prosecute organized crime. The indictment covered a range of criminal activity committed between 2012 and 2018. According to the charging documents, the gang was responsible for multiple deletions, attempted deletions, robberies, assaults, and dozens of drug transactions. In addition, the indictment described widespread use of community firearms, shared weapons passed among gang members, as well as organized credit card fraud schemes used to generate income. The federal charges carried a maximum sentence of life in prison and were the result of a years-long investigation involving numerous agencies. Among the most prominent individuals charged was Anthony, a dog hopper, identified by federal authorities as a ringleader within the 110 gang. In October 2019, Hopper was convicted at trial of RICO conspiracy, including the deletion of a rival in 2014. During his sentencing, the court found that Hopper had ordered and directed multiple deletions, shootings, drug sales, and robberies, making him a central figure in the gang's operations. In September 2020, he was sentenced to 385 months over 32 years in federal prison. Federal prosecutors described him as a dangerously evil leader of the gang. Another key figure was Yamar "Spanky" Long, who pleaded guilty in 2020. Long admitted that he drove the car from which Hopper opened fire in the 2014 deletion, and he also participated in drug distribution. Long was sentenced to 210 months or 17.5 years in prison. Gretel Rennie Smith, a one-time member of the gang with a previous RICO conviction from 2011, also pleaded guilty. He admitted to stabbing another man during a gang conflict in 2017 and selling drugs. Smith received a sentence of 78 months. Norris Pep Kinsey, another of the 14 individuals indicted, admitted to drug trafficking, illegal firearm possession, and participating in at least one shooting on behalf of the gang. He was sentenced in November 2020 to 150 months. Rashawn Wormy Wynn also entered a guilty plea and received 92 months in prison. Wynn later appealed his sentence, claiming he played only a minor role, but in 2024, the Court of Appeals upheld the conviction, pointing to Wynn's long-standing ties and activities within the gang. By the end of 2020, all indicted defendants had either pleaded guilty or, like Hopper, were found guilty at trial. Sentencing hearings for each took place between 2019 and 2020. Judges involved in the case emphasized the violent nature of the gang's conduct and the damage it caused to the community. Some defendants, like Wynn, pursued appeals, but those challenges were ultimately rejected by higher courts.
Your actions, both of you, throughout your life and throughout the events in this indictment, and throughout the criminal enterprise that you were a part of for many years, have left a trail of devastation, pain, and destruction that is almost incomprehensible. That two people could do so much damage to so many other people in so many ways. It does respect the jury's verdict. In this court's opinion, the jury's verdict was supported by the evidence, clearly supported by the overwhelming evidence of guilt as it relates to each of the defendants. The claims of ineffective assistance of counsel are not supported by the record.
The V-Not Gang was a violent street crew based in Syracuse's south side, specifically in the Valley area, stretching north to West Newell Street. Federal authorities described the group as a territorial drug distribution gang that routinely used violence to enforce its dominance and defend its turf. By the mid-2000s, V-Not became locked in a dangerous feud with the rival Bricktown Gang. This conflict reached a deadly turning point on November 26, 2010, when V-Not member Kahari Smith shot and deleted 18-year-old high school basketball player Kihari Blue on Interstate 81. The shooting shocked the city and was seen as one of the most egregious examples of escalating gang violence in Syracuse. Law enforcement officials labeled V-Not one of the most violent street gangs in our city, citing their long track record of shootings, intimidation, and drug trafficking. On May 1, 2012, a federal grand jury in the Northern District of New York returned a superseding indictment charging 11 Volts non-members with racketeering conspiracy under the federal RICO statute. The indictment alleged that, between 2003 and 2012, the defendants conspired to engage in a broad pattern of organized criminal activity. Specific charges included the demise of Kihari Blue, at least 10 other shootings, 18 crack cocaine distribution offenses, 8 illegal weapons possession charges, multiple robberies and assaults, and witness intimidation. The government's case presented V-Not as a structured and violent gang enterprise that thrived on fear, retaliation, and illegal drug sales. Each defendant faced up to life in federal prison, fines of up to $250,000, and terms of supervised release. Attorney Richard Hartunian said the group had poisoned our streets with drugs, violence, and all manner of crime, victimizing children and other innocent people. Key figures in the indictment included several high-ranking or influential gang members. Jeffrey Ghost Powell was the first to plead guilty in September 2012. Kenneth Jerome Jackson entered his plea in December 2012 and later admitted to firing an AK-47 into the home of a rival gang member. Riata Rico Travitt was the only female indicted in the case and also pleaded guilty in December 2012. Donald Johnson Jr. followed with a guilty plea in February 2013, and Nathan "Nate" King entered his plea in September 2013. Kahori Kiss Smith, who was responsible for the deletion of Kihari Blue, pleaded guilty on September 19, 2013, eliminating the need for a high-profile trial that had been scheduled for the following month. Kenneth Jackson was sentenced to 92 months, approximately 7.5 years, while Donald Johnson received 108 months, 9 years. Habakkuk H.B. Nickens, another key figure who had played a central role in the gang's violent operations, was sentenced to 240 months, 20 years in April 2014. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that Nickens had driven the getaway vehicle used in the murder of Kihari Blue. Kahari Smith, the shooter, was awaiting sentencing at the time of the last reports and faced a potential life term. In court documents and sentencing hearings, judges emphasized the defendant's repeated engagement in violent acts, including shootings and drug trafficking. For instance, Jackson was found to have fired 22 rounds from an AK-47, and Nickens was confirmed to have facilitated the gang's ambush attack on a rival. Following the indictment, the legal proceedings advanced steadily. By late 2013, all 11 defendants had pleaded guilty. Jeffrey Powell's plea was the first, and Nathan King's plea was announced as the 10th. Kahori Smith was the final defendant to plead, acknowledging his direct role in the 2010 highway deletion. The absence of a full trial was considered a legal victory that spared victims' families the emotional toll of lengthy court proceedings. In their admissions, each defendant acknowledged participation in various acts of violence, drug trafficking, and other crimes listed in the indictment. The impact of the case extended beyond the courtroom. In 2016, former gang member Habakkuk Nickens, now serving a 20-year sentence, helped organize a community balloon release titled "Gone But Not Forgotten" to honor victims of gun violence. The event drew local leaders and residents alike, including Syracuse City Councilor Helen Hudson, who spoke about the lingering grief and trauma felt by families in the community. Hudson emphasized the emotional burden of generational violence, stating that many residents carry so much anger. "We don't even know why we carry it." Grassroots groups such as Mothers Against Gun Violence and OGs Against Violence use the event to promote healing and call for unity. In the eyes of many, the V-Not indictments marked a step toward restoring peace, but the community also recognized the need for continued investment in prevention, support, and healing. The federal and state indictments brought against the 110 Gang, Bricktown Gang, and V-Not Gang represented a turning point in the fight against organized street crime in Syracuse. Through the combined efforts of the FB, DEA, ATF, Syracuse Police, and New York State agencies, dozens of dangerous individuals were removed from the streets, drug supply chains were disrupted, and entire neighborhoods began to reclaim a sense of safety. While these cases highlighted the scope of the violence and criminal activity plaguing the city, they also demonstrated the power of collaboration and sustained law enforcement pressure. Still, the story does not end with arrests and convictions. Community leaders, activists, and residents have emphasized the need for prevention, youth programs, and economic opportunities to break the cycle of gang involvement. As Syracuse moves forward, these indictments serve as both a warning to those who seek to bring harm and a promise to the communities fighting for peace, stability, and a better future.